How does a peaceful afternoon stroll with her baby turn into a scene of unimaginable horror? What drives a man to stalk, threaten, and ultimately take the life of the mother of his child right before their baby's eyes? On April 6, 2024, in the heart of Bradford city centre, a young mother's life was brutally cut short. Kulsuma Akter, 27, was pushing her baby in a pram, likely lost in thoughts of her child's future, when her estranged husband, Habibur Masum, 26, approached her with a knife. In a matter of seconds, the mundane turned monstrous. Masum stabbed her multiple times, leaving her to collapse on the pavement as their baby sat helplessly in the pram, unharmed but forever scarred by the loss of a mother's love. Passers-by screamed. Chaos erupted, but for Kulsuma it was too late. Her life ended there in the harsh light of day as her killer fled the scene. But this wasn't an isolated act of violence. It was the horrifying climax of a months-long nightmare, one that Kulsuma had desperately tried to escape. Kulsuma Akter arrived in Bradford 3 years before her death, her eyes bright with hope and her heart full of dreams. At 24, she had left her family's modest home in a rural village outside Dhaka, Bangladesh, to marry Habibur Masum, a man who promised her a better life in England. Their wedding was a small, joyful affair, attended by friends from Bradford's tight-knit Bangladeshi community. Kulsuma wore a red and gold sari that had belonged to her grandmother, and she smiled so radiantly that her new friends said she looked like a Bollywood star. She was so excited about everything, recalled Fatima, a neighbour who became one of Kulsuma's first friends in the UK. She would call her mother every week, describing the supermarkets, the parks, even the weather. She said she felt like she was living in a dream. For the first year of their marriage, that dream seemed real. Kulsuma enrolled in English classes at the local community centre, determined to improve her language skills. She found work at a textile factory, proud to contribute to their household income. In the evenings, she would cook traditional Bangladeshi dishes while practicing her English with Masum, who worked at a nearby warehouse. They seemed happy, Fatima remembered. He would bring her flowers sometimes, and she would giggle like a schoolgirl. We thought they were one of those couples who would grow old together, but behind closed doors, cracks were already forming in their fairy tale. Everything changed when Kulsuma became pregnant. What should have been the happiest time of her life became the beginning of a nightmare she couldn't have imagined. Her pregnancy was challenging. Severe morning sickness kept her bedridden for weeks, and she had to quit her job at the textile factory. The loss of her independence, combined with the physical demands of pregnancy, made her more vulnerable than ever. It was during this time that Masum's true nature began to emerge. He started questioning everything, Kulsuma would later confide, to a counselor at the women's refuge. Who I talked to, what I bought at the store, why I was on the phone with my mother for so long. He said pregnant women shouldn't be gossiping all the time. The first physical violence came when Kulsuma was 6 months pregnant. She had been speaking to her mother in Bengali, excitedly describing the baby's kicks when Masum burst through the door. He accused her of complaining about him to her family, of making him look bad. The slap came so suddenly that Kulsuma barely had time to protect her belly. I was so shocked, she later told the counselor. In my family, in my culture, hitting a pregnant woman is like cursing your own bloodline. I couldn't believe he would do such a thing. But he did, and it was only the beginning. When baby Aisha was born in August 2023, Kulsuma thought the violence might stop. Surely, she reasoned, becoming a father would change Masum, would make him understand the precious nature of the family they had created. For a few weeks, it seemed like her prayers had been answered. Masum was tender with the baby, proud to show her off to friends and neighbors, but the respite was brief. As Aisha grew from a newborn into an active, demanding infant, Masum's patience wore thin. He complained about the baby's crying, about the way Kulsuma's attention was divided, about the mess and chaos that comes with caring for a child. His anger, once reserved for private moments, began to spill over into their daily life. He would get angry when I was breastfeeding, Kulsuma confided to her friend Fatima during one of their rare meetings. He said I was being too much with the baby, that I was spoiling her. But how can you spoil a baby by feeding her? The violence escalated. Masum would grab Kulsuma's wrists when she tried to comfort the crying baby, leaving bruises that she covered with long sleeves. He monitored her phone calls with her mother, timing them and becoming enraged if they went on too long. He controlled their finances, giving her barely enough money for groceries and baby supplies. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home, Kulsuma later told the counselor. He would follow me to the store, question why I needed to buy certain things, accuse me of wasting money. When I asked for more money for baby formula, he said I should be grateful for what I had. The emotional abuse was perhaps even more damaging than the physical violence. Masum would tell Kulsuma she was a bad mother, that she was failing their daughter, that no one would ever want her if she left him. He isolated her from the few friends she had made, claiming they were filling her head with Western ideas about marriage and family. He would say things like, "You think you're so smart, but you can't even speak proper English," Kulsuma recalled. He would make fun of my accent, my cooking, the way I dressed. He made me feel like I was worthless. By the time Aisha was 6 months old, Kulsuma had become a shadow of the vibrant young woman who had arrived in Bradford with such hope. She was thin, anxious, and constantly on edge. Her mother, Rashida, noticed the change during their phone calls. She stopped laughing, Rashida later said through tears. My daughter had the most beautiful laugh, but it just disappeared. When I asked her about it, she would say she was just tired from taking care of the baby. But I knew something was wrong. The signs of impending danger were there, hidden, in plain sight, but Kulsuma was too isolated and too afraid to share them with anyone who might have helped. Masum had become obsessed with control. He would check her phone, demanding to know about every text message and call. He would follow her to the grocery store, timing how long she was gone and questioning any delays. He had installed a tracking app on her phone, though Kulsuma didn't discover this until much later. He would know things about where I had been, things I hadn't told him, she said. Once, I stopped at the pharmacy for baby medicine, and when I got home, he asked me why I had taken so long. I hadn't told him about the pharmacy visit, but somehow he knew. The threats began in earnest when Aisha was 8 months old. During one of their arguments, Masum grabbed Kulsuma by the throat and pressed her against the wall. "If you ever try to leave me," he whispered, his face inches from hers, "I will find you. I will find you, and I will make you sorry you were ever born. And I will make sure you never see Aisha again." It was then that Kulsuma realized her husband wasn't just angry, he was dangerous. By January 2024, Kulsuma knew she had to leave. The violence was escalating, and she feared for her safety and her daughter's well-being. But leaving an abusive relationship is never simple, especially for a woman with limited resources and no family support system in the country. Kulsuma began planning her escape carefully. She contacted the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, speaking to counselors who helped her understand her options. She saved small amounts of money whenever she could, hiding it in a book that Masum never bothered to look at. She researched women's refuges and legal aid services. "I was terrified," she later admitted. "I didn't know if I could survive on my own with a baby, but I knew I couldn't survive staying with him." The final straw came in early February 2024. Masum had been drinking, something he had been doing more frequently, and became enraged when Aisha's crying interrupted his television program. He grabbed the baby from Kulsuma's arms and shook Her screaming at the infant to shut up. I saw my daughter's face, Kulsuma told the counselor. She was so scared, and I realized that if I didn't leave, he might hurt her. That night I made the decision. I would rather die trying to escape than let my daughter grow up in that house. 3 days later, while Masum was at work, Kulsuma packed a single bag with baby clothes, diapers, and a few precious photographs. She left everything else behind: furniture, clothes, even the gold jewelry her mother had given her as a wedding gift. She called a taxi and went directly to the women's refuge, where she was admitted into their protection program for the first time in months. Kulsuma felt like she could breathe. The safe house was a converted Victorian home in a quiet neighborhood, designed to blend in with the residential properties around it. For Kulsuma, it was both a sanctuary and a prison. She was safe from Masum's violence, but she was also cut off from the life she had been trying to build. It was hard, she told the counselor. I was grateful to be safe, but I felt like I was hiding from the world. I couldn't work, couldn't make friends, couldn't even take Aisha to the park without looking over my shoulder. The other women in the refuge became her lifeline. There was Sarah, a British woman who had fled with her 2 young sons after her partner tried to strangle her. There was another Bangladeshi woman, Fatima, who had been in an abusive marriage for 15 years before finally finding the courage to leave. They shared meals, watched each other's children, and provided emotional support during the darkest moments. We were like sisters, Fatima recalled. We understood each other's pain in ways that no one else could. Kulsuma was so worried about her daughter, always asking if she was doing the right thing, if Aisha would be okay. But even in the refuge, Kulsuma couldn't escape the fear. She would have nightmares about Masum finding her, about him taking Aisha away. She would wake up in cold sweats, checking to make sure her daughter was still breathing peacefully in the crib beside her bed. She was always looking over her shoulder, Sarah remembered. Even in the house, where we were supposed to be safe, she would jump at every sound. She was terrified that he would find her. What Kulsuma didn't know was that Masum had become completely consumed with finding her and bringing her back. Her departure had shattered his sense of control, and he couldn't accept that his wife had left him. In his mind, she belonged to him, along with their daughter, and he had every right to reclaim what was his. Masum quit his job at the warehouse to dedicate himself full-time to the search. He drove through Bradford's neighborhoods, looking for any sign of Kulsuma and Aisha. He contacted mutual friends, claiming he was worried about his wife's mental health and needed to find her for her own safety. He came to my house 3 times, Fatima, Kulsuma's former neighbor, recalled. He was crying, saying he just wanted to make sure they were okay. He seemed so desperate, so broken. I almost felt sorry for him. But Masum's desperation was dangerous. He had created fake social media accounts to try to contact Kulsuma's friends. He had convinced his sister to call women's shelters, pretending to be a concerned family member looking for a missing relative. He had even shown up at the mosque during women's prayer meetings, demanding that the community leaders help him find his missing wife and child. The breakthrough came in late March, when a friend of a friend mentioned seeing a woman who looked like Kulsuma at a community center on the other side of town. She had been with a baby, attending an English class. Masum began staking out the community center, and on the 3rd day, he spotted her. She looked different, thinner, more cautious, but it was definitely Kulsuma, carrying Aisha in a baby carrier. He followed her back to the safe house, though he didn't immediately understand what the building was. Over the next few days, he watched the routines of the women who lived there, noting their schedules and movements. "I found you," he whispered to himself as he sat in his car, watching Kulsuma through the windows of the safe house. "You can't run from me forever." In the weeks leading up to the attack, Kulsuma had been doing better. She was attending regular counseling sessions, improving her English, and beginning to believe that she might actually be able to build a new life for herself and Aisha. She was starting to smile again, Sarah remembered. She would laugh at Aisha's attempts to walk, and she was making plans for the future. She talked about getting a job, maybe finding a small flat where she and Aisha could live independently. Kulsuma had even begun to believe that she might be truly free from Masum. It had been weeks since she'd seen any sign of him, and she was starting to relax her guard. She would take Aisha for walks in the neighborhood, attend the mother and baby group at the local library, and even make small talk with other parents at the playground. She was becoming herself again, the refugee counselor noted in her files. She was engaging more in group sessions, talking about her hopes for the future and showing real progress in her recovery from trauma. But Masum was watching, waiting, planning. On the morning of April 6, 2024, Kulsuma woke up feeling optimistic. It was a beautiful spring day, the first truly warm day after a long winter, and she was excited to take Aisha outside to enjoy the sunshine. She was humming while she got Aisha ready, Sarah remembered. She seemed so happy, so peaceful. She said she was going to walk to the city center, maybe buy some new clothes for Aisha since she was growing so fast. Kulsuma dressed Aisha in a bright yellow outfit that made her brown skin glow, then prepared the pushchair for their outing. She packed a bag with snacks, toys, and a change of clothes for the baby. She even brought her camera, planning to take photos of Aisha to send to her mother in Bangladesh. "We're going to have a lovely day out, little star," she told Aisha as she strapped her into the pushchair, using the Bengali pet name she had called her daughter since birth. As they left the safe house, Kulsuma turned to wave at the other women who were watching from the kitchen window. She was smiling, genuinely happy for the first time in months. She had no way of knowing that her husband was watching from a car parked across the street, his hand already reaching for the knife he had been carrying for days. It was 3:15 p.m. when Kulsuma's world ended. She had spent a pleasant afternoon in Bradford city centre, window shopping and enjoying the spring sunshine. Aisha had been delighted by the crowds and the activity, clapping her hands at street performers and babbling happily at strangers who cooed over her in her bright yellow outfit. Kulsuma had stopped outside a children's clothing store, bending down to adjust Aisha's position in the pushchair and point out the colourful displays in the window. "Look at the pretty dresses, little star," she said in Bengali, her voice soft and loving. "Maybe when you're bigger, we can buy you something beautiful like that." It was then that she caught sight of a familiar figure across the street. Her blood turned to ice. Masum was standing under a shop awning about 50 meters away, staring directly at her. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, and his face was set in an expression of cold determination. Their eyes met across the busy street, and Kulsuma saw her own death in his gaze. Without thinking, she began to run, pushing the pram as fast as she could while trying not to panic Aisha, who sensed her mother's distress and began to cry. "Please," she gasped to a young couple outside a coffee shop. "My husband, he's going to hurt me. Please call the police." But before they could respond, before they could even process what she was saying, Masum was there. He had moved through the crowd like a predator, shoving aside anyone who got in his way. His hand was already reaching into his jacket pocket, fingers closing around the knife he had wrapped in newspaper and carried for days. "Kulsuma!" His voice cut through the street noise like a blade, filled with months of accumulated rage and obsession. "You can't run from me, you're my wife." She spun to face him, instinctively stepping in front of the pushchair to shield Aisha from whatever was coming. The sight of her baby daughter seemed to give her strength, and she found her voice. "Please, Habiba," she whispered, reverting to Bengali in her terror. "Please don't do this. Think about our daughter. Think about Aisha." "I am thinking about her," Masum snarled, pulling out the knife. I'm thinking about how you stole her from me, how you turned her against me. She's just a baby, Kulsuma pleaded, tears streaming down her face. She doesn't understand any of this. Please, if you love her. I do love her, Masum screamed. I love her more than you ever could. And I love you, but you destroyed everything. You humiliated me. You made me look like a fool. Around them, the crowd was beginning to realize what was happening. Someone screamed. People began backing away, pulling out phones to call for help. But help was still minutes away, and Kulsuma had only seconds. We can talk, she said desperately. We can work this out. Just put the knife down and we can... The first stab caught her in the chest, sudden and shocking. Kulsuma stumbled backward, her hand flying to the wound, blood seeping between her fingers. The pain was excruciating, but... What broke her heart was the sound of Aisha's cries intensifying, as if the baby somehow understood that the world was ending. You left me, Masum said, his voice eerily calm now. You took my daughter, and you left me. He struck again and again, each blow fueled by months of rage, obsession, and the twisted belief that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Kulsuma's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the pavement, her last conscious thought not of her own pain, but of her daughter's future. Who would take care of Aisha? Who would sing her the Bengali lullabies? Who would teach her about her grandmother in Bangladesh? Who would love her the way only a mother could? As her vision darkened, Kulsuma's hand reached out toward the pushchair, trying to touch her daughter one last time. I love you, little star, she whispered in Bengali, the words barely audible over Aisha's cries and the chaos surrounding them. Mama loves you so much. Then silence. Habibur Masum didn't run far. After stabbing his wife to death in front of dozens of witnesses, he walked calmly for 3 streets before sitting down on a bench outside a library. When police found him 20 minutes later, he was staring at his bloody hands as if he couldn't quite believe what they had done. I didn't mean to kill her, he told the arresting officers over and over. I just wanted her to come home. I just wanted my family back. But the evidence told a different story. A story of months of calculated stalking, escalating threats, and a deliberate decision to arm himself with a knife before confronting his estranged wife. From November 2023 to April 2024, Masum had waged a campaign of terror against Kulsuma that would have chilled anyone who knew the full extent of it. He had tracked her movements using a GPS app secretly installed on her phone, followed her to medical appointments, grocery stores, and mother and baby groups, sent threatening text messages from multiple phone numbers when she blocked his primary number, loitered outside the safe house where she was staying, taking photographs of the building and its residents, created fake social media profiles to try to contact her friends and family, convinced relatives to call women's shelters claiming to be looking for a missing family member, verbally threatened to kill Kulsuma if she didn't return to him, threatened to take Aisha away and never let Kulsuma see her again, told multiple people that he would rather see her dead than with another man. The picture that emerged was of a man consumed by obsession and control, who'd escalated from emotional abuse to physical violence to stalking to murder over the course of just 6 months. After a 3-day manhunt, Masum was arrested and charged with murder. In a shocking legal maneuver, he admitted to killing Kulsuma, but pleaded guilty only to manslaughter, claiming he hadn't intended to kill her, despite bringing a knife to their confrontation and stabbing her multiple times in front of witnesses. He also faces charges of stalking, November 2023, April 2024, making threats to kill, multiple occasions, assault, previous domestic violence incidents, carrying a knife in a public place, breach of non-molestation order. Kulsuma had obtained a restraining order. The question that haunts everyone who knew about Masum's behavior is, could this tragedy have been prevented? Kulsuma had reported his threats to police multiple times. She had obtained a restraining order. She had fled to a safe house specifically designed to protect women from violent partners. She had done everything the system told her to do to keep herself safe, and yet Masum still found her. He still stalked her. He still killed her in broad daylight on a busy street. Masum's trial for murder began 6 months after Kulsuma's death, and from the first day, it was clear that this would be a battle over the very definition of justice. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Sarah Matthews, argued that this was a case of premeditated murder. A man who had stalked his victim for months, armed himself with a weapon, and deliberately chose to kill the mother of his child rather than accept that. She had left him. The defendant wants this court to believe that he didn't intend to kill Kulsuma Akter, Matthews told the jury in her opening statement. But the evidence shows a man who spent months planning this attack, who chose to bring a knife to a confrontation, and who stabbed a defenseless woman multiple times while she begged for her life. If that's not murder, then what is? The defense, however, painted a different picture. Masum's barrister, Jonathan Rhodes, argued that his client was a broken man who had acted in a moment of desperation, not malice. "My client deeply regrets what happened that day," Rhodes told the court. "He is a man who was devastated by the loss of his family, who acted out of desperation and mental anguish, not out of a desire to kill. While his actions were inexcusable, they were not the calculated moves of a cold-blooded murderer." The distinction between murder and manslaughter might seem academic, but it carries significant legal consequences. A murder conviction would mean a mandatory life sentence with a minimum term of 25 years. A manslaughter conviction could result in a much shorter sentence, potentially allowing Masum to be released while his daughter is still a child. For Kulsuma's family, the legal technicalities are less important than the simple fact that she is gone. "He took her from us," her mother Rashida said in a victim impact statement read to the court. "He took her from her child. He took away all the birthdays, all the phone calls, all the laughter we will never hear again. What does it matter what they call it? She's gone, and he's the reason." The trial has been particularly difficult for the Bangladeshi community in Bradford, many of whom knew both Kulsuma and Masum. Some have struggled to reconcile the quiet, polite man they thought they knew with the killer who stalked and murdered his wife in broad daylight. "We all feel like we failed her somehow," said Imam Muhammad Rahman, who had tried to counsel the couple during their marriage. "She was part of our community, and we should have protected her better. We should have seen the signs." As the trial approaches its conclusion, the community continues to grapple with difficult questions about domestic violence, cultural expectations, and the responsibility they all share to protect vulnerable women. Vigils have been held in Bradford, with mourners leaving flowers and teddy bears at the spot where Kulsuma fell. "She was one of us," said local resident Amna Khalil. "This shouldn't have happened. Not here, not anywhere. We need to do better." As Masum awaits the jury's verdict, the true cost of his actions becomes clear. A family has been destroyed, a child has been orphaned, and a community has been traumatized by the brutal reality of domestic violence. Baby Aisha, now 18 months old, is being cared for by distant relatives in London who stepped forward when no one else could take her in. She's too young to understand what happened to her mother, but trauma doesn't require comprehension. The sound of her mother's last screams, the chaos and terror of that April afternoon, the sudden absence of the voice that had sung her lullabies, all of it lives in her small body, even if her mind can't yet make sense of it. Kulsuma's mother, Rashida, remains in Bangladesh, unable to afford the visa and travel costs that would allow her to attend her daughter's funeral or meet her granddaughter. She spends her days in a grief so profound that neighbors worry she might not survive it. "I talk to her picture every day," Rashida said through tears during a phone interview. "I tell her about my day, about the weather, about the neighbors. I pretend she can hear me. I pretend she's coming home. The support workers at the women's refuge where Kulsuma had lived are also struggling with her death. They had believed she was safe, that they had successfully helped her escape her abuser. Her murder has forced them to confront the harsh reality that even the best protection systems can fail. "We all loved Kulsuma," said Sarah, who had shared the refuge with her. She was starting to believe in herself again, starting to plan for the future. She should have been safe. The system should have protected her. The question that haunts everyone who knew about Kulsuma's situation is one that domestic violence advocates hear too often. How many red flags must a woman wave before she is truly protected? Kulsuma had done everything right. She had left her abuser. She had reported his threats to police. She had obtained a restraining order. She had sought refuge in a safe house designed specifically to protect women from violent partners. She had cooperated with support services and followed all the safety protocols, and still it wasn't enough. Still Masum found her. Still he stalked her. Still he killed her in broad daylight on a busy street while their baby daughter watched from her pushchair. Her death raises uncomfortable questions about how society protects vulnerable women and whether the current system is adequate to address the escalating dangers of domestic violence and stalking. Kulsuma Akter's story is not unique. Every week in the UK, 2 women die at the hands of current or former partners. Every day, countless women live in fear of men who claim to love them, but who have turned that love into a weapon of control and violence. Domestic violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. It thrives in silence, in ignored pleas for help, in overlooked warning signs, in systems that fail to take women's fears seriously until it's too late. Kulsuma's murder is a stark reminder that we must do better for the victims, for the survivors, and for the children left behind to make sense of senseless violence. If you recognize these signs in your own life or in the life of someone you care about, please understand that the danger is real and the time to act is now. Don't wait. Don't hope it will get better. Don't believe promises to change. Domestic violence escalates. It doesn't improve on its own. Kulsuma Akter was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a mother, a woman with dreams and hopes for her child's future. Her story must serve as more than just another tragic headline. It must be a catalyst for change, a call to action, a reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable women in our communities. Share this story. Break the silence. Save a life, because somewhere right now, another woman is living in fear of the man who claims to love her. Another woman is planning her escape. Another woman is wondering if anyone will believe her, help her, protect her. Let's make sure that woman's story ends differently than Kulsuma's did.